Ethan, I'm sorry, I can't go to Peking University with you. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs as I stared at Seraphina across the small cafe table. Her eyes, those same amber eyes that had gazed at me with such warmth just hours ago, now refused to meet mine, flickering with something I'd never seen before. Guilt. What do you mean? My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. We'd planned this together for months. Peking University. The best in the country. Our future, mapped out side by side, like it had always been since we were children. She twisted her fingers in her lap, that nervous habit I'd found endearing for years now feeling like a knife twisting in my chest. The new artificial intelligence program at South City University. It suits me better. South City University. My blood turned to ice, that barely ranked institution in the South, the only place KIERAN Chen could get into with his mediocre grades. The quiet boy who sat in the corner of our classroom, wearing his faded uniform like a badge of poverty. The boy I'd never paid attention to because why would I? I was Ethan Rivers, top of our class, destined for greatness with the school beauty by my side. But now, watching Seraphina's face flush as she mentioned that godforsaken university, everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. This is about him, isn't it? The words escaped before I could stop them. KIERAN. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. No, Ethan, you're being ridiculous. Am I? I leaned forward, studying her face like I was seeing it for the first time. The girl I'd loved since we were 3 years old, who used to crawl into my bed clutching her little pillow, saying girls were supposed to sleep with their future husbands. The same girl who'd written me clumsy love letters covered in hand-drawn hearts just last year. When had that changed? When had those hearts started beating for someone else? Come with me to South City, she said suddenly, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Her touch, once the source of all my comfort, now felt foreign, desperate. That way we can still be together. I've always listened to you before, just let me have my way this time, all right? Her words pierced through me like needles. This time. As if our entire future was just another whim she wanted me to indulge, as if 18 years of shared memories, whispered promises and dreams built together could be discarded for a program that suited her better. I stared at our joined hands, remembering all the times I'd held them, when she cried over scraped knees, when she was nervous before exams, when she'd confessed her feelings with shaking fingers and tear-bright eyes. All lies. Or worse, all real at the time, but meaningless now. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my hand away. Okay, I said quietly. Relief flooded her features, that brilliant smile I'd fallen in love with lighting up her face. She didn't see the death in my eyes, didn't notice how my voice had gone completely flat. She was already thinking about him, about KIERAN and their future together at South City University. I'll think about it, I added, watching her nod eagerly. But I'd already made my decision. If I wasn't the only one in Seraphina's heart, then I didn't want any part of it. That very evening, while she texted excitedly about dormitory arrangements and course catalogues, I quietly gathered every document I needed. The application to Cambridge University, my secret backup plan, was submitted before midnight. Seraphina could have her mediocre university and her mediocre boy. I was done being anyone's second choice. The memory hit me like a freight train as I watched Seraphina's retreating figure through the cafe window. 3 years old, both of us barely tall enough to reach the kitchen counter, and there she was, wobbling into my bedroom clutching her favorite pink pillow, her baby voice serious as death. Mama says girls sleep with their husbands when they grow up, Ethan, so I'm practicing. Even at 3, Seraphina Chen had been the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Silky black hair that caught sunlight like spun gold, enormous amber eyes that seemed to hold secrets, and that stubborn little chin that jutted out whenever she'd made up her mind about something. Our mothers, best friends since college, had laughed at her declaration. But I remember feeling something warm and important settle in my chest, a promise maybe. A certainty that she was mine and I was hers, forever and always. Growing up next door to each other made that certainty feel natural as breathing. At 7, when Tommy Rodriguez stole her butterfly hairpin during recess, I'd fought him behind the gymnasium until my lip split and my eye swelled shut. The hairpin had cracked during the scuffle, but I'd carried it in my pocket like a treasure, presenting it to her with shaking hands. She'd cried, not from disappointment, but from overwhelming gratitude, her small fingers tracing the damage as if it were made of diamonds. "You're my hero, Ethan Rivers," she'd whispered, standing on her tiptoes to press a kiss to my bruised cheek. At 12, when I'd been hospitalized with pneumonia, she'd skipped 3 days of classes to sit by my bedside. I still remembered waking up to find her there, red-eyed and exhausted, gripping my hand like I might disappear if she let go. "Don't scare me like that," she'd sobbed. "You're not allowed to leave me, Ethan. Promise me." "I promise," I'd whispered back, meaning it with every fiber of my being. At 15, she'd given me my first real love letter, 3 pages of cramped handwriting filled with misspelled words and hand-drawn hearts in every margin. I'd kept it hidden in my desk drawer, reading it so many times the paper had grown soft with handling. The last line was burned into my memory. "In this life and every life after, I choose you, Ethan Rivers, always and forever, your Seraphina." For 15 years, we'd been inseparable, 2 halves of the same soul, everyone said. The golden couple of our high school, me with my academic achievements and athletic scholarships, her with her ethereal beauty and gentle kindness. Teachers predicted our future together with knowing smiles. Our parents already discussed wedding plans over dinner parties. Even strangers could see it, the invisible thread that connected us, pulling us back to each other no matter what. So when the college entrance exams ended and rumors spread that Seraphina was finally ready to confess her feelings officially, I hadn't been surprised. I'd been waiting for this moment since I was 7 years old, since the day I'd first fought for her and realized I'd fight the whole world if it meant keeping her safe. I'd been reaching for that pink envelope, my heart hammering with anticipation, when she appeared. The woman looked exactly like Seraphina, but older, harder somehow. Same face, same amber eyes, but wearing an expensive business suit and an expression of cold calculation I'd never seen on my Seraphina's features. She'd burst through the classroom door like an avenging angel, tearing the love letter from my fingers and ripping it to shreds. "Don't confess to Ethan," she'd said, her voice carrying an authority that made 18-year-old Seraphina step back in shock. "He is not your true love." The woman had pointed across the room to where KIERAN Chen sat hunched over his desk, carefully copying notes in his faded notebook. "Do you see him? 10 years later, you will love him madly, with a love that shakes heaven and earth. Since you are destined to be with him, why waste these 10 years? My Seraphina, my sweet, rational Seraphina, had stared at this madwoman in disbelief. "You're insane. In this life, I only like Ethan." But the damage had been done, the confession never happened, and somehow, impossibly, the older woman had stayed. She claimed to be Seraphina from 10 years in the future, determined to help her younger self see through her heart earlier. At first, I dismissed it as elaborate teenage drama. Seraphina would come to her senses, realize this was all ridiculous, and things would go back to normal. But then, I started noticing the changes. Small things at first. When KIERAN caught a cold, Seraphina immediately offered to take him to the hospital, forgetting that I'd been waiting for her at our planned study session for over an hour. During group dinners, she'd instinctively pick the peanuts out of the kung pao chicken, claiming she was removing them for me, but then placing the clean pieces directly onto KIERAN's plate instead. I watched, my stomach churning, as she'd forgotten I was allergic to peanuts, something she'd remembered religiously for 8 years. The worst was the rainy Tuesday in March. Seraphina had brought only one umbrella to school, and when the downpour started, I'd naturally moved to share it with her like we'd done 100 times before. Instead, she'd thrust it into KIERAN's hands, insisting he needed it more because his apartment is farther away. I'd stood there in the rain, watching my girlfriend of 15 years get soaked to the skin rather than let her supposed, destined love get wet. "Seraphina," I'd called out, water dripping from my hair. "What about us?" She'd paused, looking back with genuine confusion, as if she'd forgotten I existed. "You'll be fine, Ethan, you're strong." But I wasn't fine. Each small betrayal felt like a blunt knife slicing through my chest, slow and agonizing. The girl who once memorized my favorite foods now couldn't remember my allergies. The girl who used to fight our parents when they suggested we spend even one evening apart now made plans with KIERAN without thinking to include me. The older Seraphina watched these changes with satisfaction, occasionally offering pointed commentary that made my blood boil. "Good, you're learning. Ethan was always just a placeholder until you found your real destiny." During our final week of high school, I'd cornered the younger Seraphina after classes, desperate to understand what was happening to us. "Do you still love me?" I'd asked, my voice cracking despite my efforts to sound calm. She'd blinked at me in surprise, as if the question itself was strange. Of course I do, Ethan. You're. But she'd trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, unable to say what I'd always been to her, what I'd thought I'd always be. I'm your what? I'd pressed. Her face had flushed, confusion and frustration warring in her expression. You're important to me, you know that. Important, not essential, not irreplaceable, not the love of her life. Just important. That night, I'd stared at the ceiling of my bedroom, listening to the sound of laughter drifting from Seraphina's window next door. She was on the phone with someone, her voice bright with a happiness I rarely heard anymore when she spoke to me. Kieran, you're so funny, she giggled. No, don't worry about the math homework, I'll help you tomorrow. The same way she used to help me before mysterious future selves and destined loves rewrote our entire history. I'd rolled over, burying my face in my pillow, and made a decision that would change everything. If Seraphina's heart could be so easily swayed by tales of future destiny, then maybe what we'd had was never as strong as I'd believed. Maybe 15 years of shared memories and whispered promises meant nothing in the face of whatever spell this older version had cast. But I wouldn't fight for someone who no longer wanted to be fought for. I would let her go. And I would make sure she never got the chance to come back. The acceptance letter from Peking University arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick and official with the university's crimson seal. I'd been checking the mail obsessively for weeks, and when I saw both our names on matching envelopes, my heart had soared. This was it, our future, finally beginning. I'd rushed to Seraphina's house with both letters clutched in my sweating palms, bursting through her bedroom door without knocking like I had 1,000 times before. Sarah, they're here, we both got in. She'd been sitting at her vanity, brushing her long black hair with mechanical strokes. When she saw the letters, her face had gone completely white. That's wonderful, Ethan, she'd said, but her voice sounded hollow, distant. I'd ripped open my letter first, whooping with joy at the official acceptance. Then I'd handed her hers, expecting to see that brilliant smile that could light up entire rooms. Instead, she'd stared at the unopened envelope like it contained a death sentence. Aren't you going to open it? I'd asked, my excitement dimming. I need to tell you something first. Her hands had started shaking. I've been thinking about my applications and… You got in too, didn't you? I'd interrupted, grinning. I knew you would. Your essays were incredible, and your test scores… Ethan, stop. She'd set the letter down without opening it. I'm not going to Peking University. The world had tilted sideways. What do you mean? Of course you are. We planned this together. We're going to study together, get an apartment near campus. I changed my application at the last minute. The words had come out in a rush, like she was afraid she'd lose courage if she spoke slowly. South City University has this amazing new program in artificial intelligence. It's cutting edge, revolutionary, much better suited to my interests than anything Peking offers. South City University. The name had hit me like a slap. A mediocre institution 3 provinces away, known more for its low admission standards than academic excellence. The only place someone like KIERAN Chen could possibly get accepted. You're lying. My voice had been barely above a whisper. I'm not lying, the program is genuinely innovative. Cut the bullshit, Seraphina. I'd never used that tone with her before, sharp and cold. This is about him, about Kieran. Her face had flushed scarlet, confirming everything I'd suspected. For weeks, I'd watched her gravitating toward him like a moth to flame. The way she'd rush to his side when he coughed, how she'd started packing an extra lunch, claiming she made too much, but somehow Kieran always ended up with the surplus. The late-night phone calls that made her giggle like a schoolgirl. It's not about anyone else, she'd protested, but her eyes couldn't meet mine. This is about my future, my career. Your future was supposed to be with me. The words had exploded out of me. We've been planning this since we were 15, Peking University, getting married after graduation, building a life together. Plans change, Ethan. Her voice had turned pleading, desperate. Please try to understand. I need to follow my heart. Your heart? I'd laughed bitterly. When did your heart suddenly decide it belonged in South City? When did it decide that a third-rate university was better than the best in the country? She'd stood up abruptly, gripping the back of her chair. Come with me. What? Come with me to South City. Her amber eyes had filled with tears, and for a moment, she'd looked like my Seraphina again, vulnerable, young. That way, we can still be together. I've always listened to you before, haven't I? I've always followed your lead, just let me have my way this time, all right? The manipulation in those words had cut deeper than any outright rejection could have. Let me have my way this time. As if 18 years of shared dreams were just another favor she was asking, as if sacrificing my future for her whims was a reasonable request between lovers. No, I'd said quietly. Hope had flickered in her eyes. No, you won't be angry? No, you understand. No, I won't follow you to South City. I'd picked up my acceptance letter, folding it carefully. But don't worry about me, Seraphina, I'm sure you and Kieran will be very happy together. Ethan, please don't be like this. I'd walked away without another word. That evening, while Seraphina had dinner with her parents, probably spinning some tale about her sudden passion for artificial intelligence, I'd methodically gone through my room, collecting every trace of our relationship. The photo booth strips from our first official date, the stuffed panda she'd won for me at the county fair, her lucky hair ribbon that she'd left at my house so many times I'd finally just kept it on my nightstand. The stack of love notes she'd slipped into my locker over the years, filled with her careful handwriting and ridiculous doodles. Items that had once been treasures now felt like evidence of my own stupidity. I'd carried everything downstairs in a large cardboard box, my parents watching with confused concern as I headed for the door. Ethan, where are you going with all that? My mother had called. Taking out the trash, I'd replied. The dumpster behind our house had swallowed 15 years of memories without ceremony. Photo after photo, letter after letter, gift after gift, all of it disappearing into the darkness like it had never mattered at all, because apparently, it hadn't. Just as I'd turned to go back inside, voices had drifted from the shadows near Seraphina's backyard. I'd frozen, recognizing both speakers immediately. Why are you still looking for him? The older Seraphina's voice had been sharp with frustration. What you should be doing now is staying with Kieran. He's the one you truly love. Nonsense! Young Seraphina had sounded furious. The only person I like is Ethan. You crazy woman, can you just disappear already? Oh really? The older version had let out a cruel laugh. Then why did you give up your future and Peking University just for Kieran? The silence that had followed had been deafening. Who said it was for him? Young Seraphina had finally whispered, but even from a distance, I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Face reality, the older woman had continued relentlessly. In 10 years, you'll love Kieran down to your very bones. You'll stay up all night caring for him, wait outside his building for hours, even sacrifice everything for his happiness. And Ethan? Her voice had turned arctic. Ethan is just a person who doesn't matter, a placeholder until you find your real destiny. A person who doesn't matter. Those words had followed me to bed that night and haunted my dreams. The girl I'd loved since childhood, the woman I'd planned to marry, discussing my complete irrelevance with her future self, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience to be discarded. 2 days later, she'd tried to salvage things with a movie date, some romantic comedy she knew I'd hate, but would sit through for her sake. I'd agreed, partly out of morbid curiosity, and partly because some masochistic part of me wanted to see just how far she'd go to maintain the illusion that I still mattered. We'd made it exactly 47 minutes into the film before her phone had started buzzing incessantly. Kieran's name had flashed on the screen over and over, each ignored call making her more agitated. I should probably, she'd started. Answer it, I'd said flatly. She'd glanced at me with surprise, perhaps expecting jealousy or anger. Instead, she'd found cold resignation. When she'd finally picked up, I'd heard Kieran's panicked voice even from my seat beside her. Sarah, thank God, I'm in trouble. These guys are after me. I think they're debt collectors or something. I'm scared. She'd bolted upright immediately. Where are you? The alley behind Zhang's restaurant. I don't know what to do. I'm coming. Stay hidden. She'd hung up and turned to me with wide, frightened eyes. Ethan, I have to go. Kieran's in danger. Of course he is, I'd murmured. Don't be like that. She'd grabbed her purse, already halfway out of her seat. This is serious. What if something happens to him? I'd looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face in the flickering light of the movie screen. The concern etched in her features, concern that had once been reserved exclusively for me. The urgency in her movements as she prepared to abandon our date, our evening, our moment together for another man's crisis. Go, I'd said simply. She'd hesitated for just a second, conflict flashing across her face. Then Kieran's voice had echoed in her memory, scared and calling her name, and the choice had been made. I'll be right back, she'd promised, already backing toward the exit. Wait for me. But I'd known, with the crystal-clear certainty that comes with having your heart finally, definitively broken, that she wouldn't be back. Not tonight, not ever. I'd stayed for the rest of the movie, watching a love story play out on screen while mine crumbled to dust around me. When the credits rolled and the theater emptied, I'd remained in my seat, staring at the blank screen and finally accepting the truth I'd been fighting for weeks. SERAPHINA CHEN was no longer mine, maybe she never really had been, and I was done pretending otherwise. The ceiling collapsed at 9:47 p.m., according to the emergency room clock that became my focal point during the endless hours that followed. Chunks of concrete and twisted metal had rained down like the wrath of God, and I'd had exactly 3 seconds to realize that SERAPHINA wasn't coming back before everything went black. When I'd regained consciousness in the ambulance, my first coherent thought hadn't been about my injuries, the fractured ribs, the gash across my forehead that would leave a permanent scar, the concussion that made the world tilt sickeningly with every breath. My first thought had been wondering if she'd even noticed I was missing. The answer came when they wheeled me into the hospital corridor and I saw her through the open door of the room next to mine. She was there, all right, but not for me. She was perched on the edge of Kieran's bed, carefully spooning soup into his mouth like he was an invalid rather than someone with a scraped elbow and bruised ego. The older SERAPHINA stood behind them, one hand possessively placed on Kieran's shoulder, watching the tender scene with satisfaction. Neither version of the woman I'd loved for 18 years had even glanced in my direction. "Excuse me," I'd croaked to the nurse adjusting my IV, my throat raw from smoke inhalation. "Could you close the door?" She'd given me a sympathetic look, probably thinking I needed rest. If only it were that simple. If only I could close a door on 18 years of shared history and wake up with a clean slate. But the universe wasn't finished with its cruel jokes yet. The next morning, Dr. Martinez had been reviewing my chart when SERAPHINA finally appeared in my doorway. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect hair disheveled, her designer dress wrinkled from what had obviously been an all-night vigil. Just not for me. "Ethan." She'd rushed to my bedside, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine concern. "Oh my God, when I heard about the collapse, are you okay? How badly are you hurt?" For a moment, a traitorous part of my heart had soared. She did care. She was here. Maybe. "I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner," she'd continued, settling into the chair beside my bed. "Kieran was in such bad shape and he doesn't have anyone else. His injuries were really serious, dislocated shoulder, possible concussion. The doctors were worried about internal bleeding." The hope that had been building in my chest crumbled like the cinema ceiling all over again. Even her apology was about him. "But you're here now," I'd managed, hating the pathetic note of gratitude in my voice. "Of course I am." She'd reached for my hand, and for a few precious seconds, it had felt like old times. Her fingers intertwined with mine, warm and familiar. "You scared me, Ethan, when they said there were casualties from the collapse." Dr. Martinez had cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt, but I need to update Mr. Rivers's emergency contact information, the form lists." He'd consulted his clipboard. "SERAPHINA CHEN, is that still current?" I'd started to nod, but SERAPHINA had gone rigid beside me. "Actually," she'd said, her voice carefully controlled, "you should probably update that. I'm not sure I'm the right person anymore." The words had hit me like a physical blow. Emergency contact, such a simple administrative detail, but one that carried enormous weight. I remembered when she'd first insisted on being listed as mine, junior year of high school, after I'd been hospitalized with appendicitis. "You're the most important person in my life," she'd said then, gripping my hand in both of hers. "If something happens to you, I need to know immediately. Promise me you'll put my name down for everything." And I had. Doctor's appointments, school forms, even my driver's license renewal. SERAPHINA CHEN had been listed as my emergency contact for 3 years, the person who would be called if I was hurt, missing, dying, the person whose opinion mattered most when I couldn't speak for myself. Now she was sitting there suggesting she wasn't the right person anymore, as if 3 years of being each other's most important people could be erased with a simple form change. "Who should we list instead?" Dr. Martinez had asked gently. "My parents," I'd whispered, not trusting my voice to remain steady. After he'd left, Seraphina had tried to explain. It's not that I don't care, Ethan. It's just complicated right now, with college applications and everything changing. But I'd stopped listening. I was too busy remembering how she'd made me promise to list her as my emergency contact just last month when I'd updated my university housing forms. Make sure they know to call me first, she'd insisted. Before your parents, before anyone, I want to be the first to know if you need help. Apparently, that promise had an expiration date. The restaurant incident 3 days later had been the final nail in the coffin of my delusions. Seraphina had insisted on taking me out to celebrate my hospital discharge, a gesture that might have meant something if she hadn't also invited both versions of herself and Kieran along. I'd arrived at the upscale Italian place wearing the new suit she'd had delivered to my house that morning. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, with a note that read, "For my handsome date, love, S." Then I'd seen Kieran. He was wearing an almost identical suit, same cut, same color, same designer label. But where mine had the subtle sheen of mass-produced fabric and machine stitching, his was clearly the original, hand-tailored, luxury wool with details that spoke of custom work and price tags I couldn't fathom. Nice suit, Kieran had commented when he saw me, with what seemed like genuine friendliness. Looks like we shopped at the same place. The older Seraphina had smirked. Not exactly the same place. Ethan's wearing the companion piece. They throw it in as a bonus when you buy the real thing. The companion piece, the throwaway, the afterthought. I'd looked down at my suit, the suit I'd thought was a loving gift, a symbol that I still mattered to her, and realized it was nothing more than a consolation prize. Kieran got the original masterpiece, I got the discount version that came free with purchase. "Sarah," I'd said quietly, "can I talk to you privately?" But she'd been too busy adjusting Kieran's tie to hear me. The graduation ball had been meant to be our night. For 4 years, Seraphina and I had talked about it, how we'd dance to our song, how I'd finally give her the promise ring I'd been saving for, how it would be the perfect cap to our high school romance before we started our life together at university. Instead, I'd watched her sign the partner registration sheet and write KIERAN Chen next to her name without hesitation. She'd looked up, pen still in hand, and seen me standing there. "Oh." The color had drained from her face. "Ethan, I made a mistake." "No," I'd said, my voice eerily calm. "I don't think you did." I'd signed my name alone on the list and walked away, leaving her staring after me with something that might have been regret if I'd still been naive enough to believe it. The older Seraphina had followed me outside, her heels clicking ominously on the marble steps. "You're being dramatic," she'd said without preamble. Seraphina made the right choice. Kieran is her future. "And what am I?" I'd asked, genuinely curious to hear her answer. A mistake she's finally correcting. Her amber eyes, so like the ones I'd fallen in love with, but cold as winter, had held no mercy. "In 10 years, she won't even remember your name. You're nothing but a detour on her path to real happiness." She'd pulled out her phone and shown me a video. It was clearly from the future, older Seraphina and Kieran in what looked like a luxury apartment, laughing together over some private joke. Kieran was wearing a wedding ring that caught the light as he pulled her close for a kiss. "This is what love looks like," future Seraphina had said, stroking the screen with one finger. "Not the puppy dog devotion you've been offering. Real, mature, destined love." More photos had followed, Kieran and Seraphina at a beach resort, her head on his shoulder as they watched the sunset. Kieran and Seraphina at some elegant dinner party, her beaming as she showed off what was clearly an engagement ring. Kieran and Seraphina in a hospital room, her holding a newborn baby while he kissed her forehead. A whole life, a complete future, none of it including me. "Still think you matter?" the older woman had asked mockingly. I'd handed her phone back without a word and walked back inside, my chest tight with something that went beyond heartbreak into a realm I didn't have words for. The fire had started during the last dance of the evening. Later, investigators would determine it was an electrical fault in the antiquated building's wiring, but in the moment, all I'd registered was the acrid smell of smoke and the screams of my classmates as flames began licking at the decorative curtains. Chaos had erupted instantly. Students had trampled toward the exits, teachers had shouted contradictory instructions, and the sprinkler system had failed to activate. Through the smoke and panic, I'd caught sight of Seraphina near the far wall, both versions of Allah flanking a terrified Kieran. Our eyes had met across the burning ballroom, and for one suspended moment, I'd seen something in her face that looked like the girl I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Fear, yes, but also recognition. A moment of clarity that cut through all the confusion and manipulation and destiny nonsense. She'd taken a step toward me. Then Kieran had cried out, stumbling as smoke overcame him, and the choice had been made. She'd turned away from me and run toward him, both versions of herself converging on the boy they claimed was her future. I'd watched them support him between them, guiding him toward the nearest exit, their entire focus on his safety. No one had looked back to see if I made it out alive. Standing there in the burning building, abandoned by the only person I'd ever truly loved, I'd finally understood what the older SERAPHINA had been trying to tell me. I really didn't matter anymore. The hospital discharge papers felt like a death certificate in my hands. 3 days of observation for smoke inhalation and minor burns. Minor, they'd said, as if the emotional devastation counted for nothing. As if watching the woman you love choose someone else over your life was just another checkbox on their medical forms. I was gathering my belongings when Kieran appeared in my doorway, his face pale and drawn. Unlike my genuine injuries, his serious wounds from the fire had amounted to nothing more than some singed eyebrows and a cough that disappeared the moment the cameras stopped rolling. "Ethan," he'd said, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine emotion, "I need to talk to you." I'd looked up from folding my smoke-damaged clothes, surprised. In 4 years of high school, Kieran and I had barely exchanged a dozen words. He was the quiet kid who sat in corners, faded into backgrounds, remained invisible until SERAPHINA's future self had dragged him into the spotlight. "What about?" I'd asked, though part of me already knew, there was only one thing that connected us now. "SERAPHINA." He'd stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I know you love her. I know you've loved her forever." The admission had caught me off guard. I'd expected denials, justifications, maybe even gloating. Not this raw honesty. "But she's meant to be with me," he'd continued, his eyes filling with tears that looked disturbingly real. "That woman, the older SERAPHINA, she showed me things, pictures of our future together, our wedding, our children, our whole life. It's beautiful, Ethan, it's everything I've ever dreamed of." "Good for you," I'd said flatly, shoving my ruined textbooks into a bag. "Please." He'd dropped to his knees beside my hospital bed, actually dropped to his knees like he was proposing. "I'm begging you. Let me have her, let me have this chance at happiness. You'll find someone else, someone better, but SERAPHINA, she's my only shot at love." I'd stared at him in disbelief. "You think I have a choice in this? You think I'm somehow preventing your great destiny?" "I think she's torn between us," he'd whispered. "I think part of her still loves you, and that's stopping her from fully embracing what we could have together. If you would just step back, disappear for a while. Give her space to realize what her heart really wants." The audacity of it had left me speechless. He was asking me to voluntarily remove myself from the equation, to make their love story easier by eliminating the inconvenient complication of my existence. "No," I'd said simply. His face had changed then, the pleading expression melting away to reveal something harder underneath. "I was hoping you'd be reasonable about this." "Reasonable?" I'd laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want me to be reasonable about watching my childhood sweetheart be stolen away by some nobody who can't even get into a decent university without her help?" Kieran had stood up slowly, his tears drying as if they'd never existed. "Fine, have it your way." He'd left without another word, and I'd thought that was the end of it, just another surreal conversation in what had become the surreal nightmare of my senior year. I'd been wrong. The attack had come 2 days later as I'd walked home from my part-time job at the bookstore. 3 men in dark clothing had emerged from the shadows of an alley, moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals. A hood had been thrown over my head, rough hands had seized my arms, and before I could even shout for help, something sharp had pricked my neck. The world had dissolved into chemical darkness. When I'd awakened, I'd been bound to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. The D was gone, but my vision had been blurry from whatever drug they'd used. Gradually, shapes had resolved into focus, and I'd seen her. The older SERAPHINA stood before me, no longer bothering with the pretense of being my SERAPHINA's loving future self. Her face was cold, calculating, stripped of any warmth I'd ever associated with those features. You should have listened to Kieran, she'd said conversationally, like we were discussing the weather. He gave you a chance to bow out gracefully. What the hell is this? I'd tried to struggle against my restraints, but the ropes were professional grade, cutting into my wrists when I moved. This is a lesson, she'd replied, about what happens when you interfere with destiny. She'd gestured to someone behind me, and a man had stepped into view carrying an iron rod about 3 feet long. My blood had turned to ice water. You're insane, I'd whispered. Seraphina will never forgive you for this. Seraphina will never know it was me, the older woman had said with a smile that chilled my soul. As far as she's concerned, you'll simply disappear from her life, and honestly, she'll be relieved. You've become an inconvenience, Ethan, a reminder of a childish infatuation she's finally outgrowing. The first blow had caught me across the ribs, and I'd screamed despite myself. The pain had been unlike anything I'd ever experienced, not just the physical agony, but the psychological horror of understanding that this was happening because I'd loved someone too much to let her go. 99 strikes, the older Seraphina had announced to her hired muscle. Not one less. I want him to remember this lesson for the rest of his life. The beating had been systematic, methodical, designed to cause maximum pain without killing me. They'd worked in shifts, one man resting while the other continued the count. Somewhere around strike 30, I'd lost consciousness. They'd thrown cold water on me to wake me up for strike 31. By strike 60, I'd been beached so, egging them to just finish me off. By strike 90, I'd been praying for death. When they'd finally reached 99, I'd been more blood than flesh, more broken than whole. They dumped me in an alley 6 blocks from my house like a bag of garbage, not caring if I lived or died. Somehow, I'd crawled home. Somehow, I'd made it to my bedroom before collapsing. And somehow, when my phone had rung an hour later, I'd found the strength to answer it. Ethan. Seraphina's voice had been bright, cheerful, completely oblivious to the fact that I was lying in my own blood. I've been trying to reach you all day. Where have you been? Hospital, I'd whispered through lips split and swollen. Hospital? What happened? Are you sick? The casual tone of her voice, like I'd called in with a cold rather than been beaten nearly to death, had been the final twist of the knife. I was attacked, I'd managed. Beaten. I'm hurt badly, Sarah. Silence on the other end. Then, oh, that's terrible. Are you going to be okay? No rush to my side, no panic, no immediate promises to come take care of me, just polite concern, the kind you'd show to an acquaintance who'd mentioned having a bad day. I don't know, I'd admitted. Well, I'm sure you'll be fine, you're tough. Another pause. Listen, I actually called because Kieran's been having some emotional issues lately. He keeps talking about hurting himself, and I'm worried he might do something drastic. I'm going to stay with him tonight to make sure he's okay. Kieran's emotional issues. While I lay there with 99 wounds marking my body like a grotesque tally sheet, she was worried about Kieran's feelings. Sarah, I'd tried one last time. I have to go, Ethan. Kieran needs me. Feel better, okay? The line had gone dead. For a long time, I'd just held the phone, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. The woman I'd loved for 18 years had brushed off my near-death experience like it was an inconvenience. She'd chosen to comfort my attacker's accomplice instead of rushing to help the victim. That was when I'd finally understood that the Seraphina I'd fallen in love with was truly gone. Whatever creature was wearing her face now felt nothing for me but irritation at my continued existence. With shaking hands, I'd opened my laptop and begun documenting everything. Photos of my injuries, each one dated and time-stamped, screenshots of the older Seraphina's threatening messages, videos I'd secretly recorded of both versions of her discussing their plans for my future, or lack thereof. Then I'd written the message that would end everything between us. Seraphina. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I've accepted a place at Cambridge University and will be leaving tonight. Don't try to find me. I know the truth about everything. About Kieran's lies, about your future self's involvement in my attack, about the 99 strikes that were meant to teach me my place. I have evidence of it all. But I won't be using it against you. I won't be fighting for you anymore. I'm simply walking away. You made your choice weeks ago, now I'm making mine. Have a good life with Kieran, you deserve each other. Ethan. P.S. Check your phone, I've sent you something to remember me by. I'd attached the photos of my beaten body, the videos of her future self's confessions, and documentation of Kieran's manipulation, including security footage I'd obtained showing him faking his suicide attempt by the lake, complete with him checking to make sure no one was watching before he'd jumped into the shallow water. The taxi to the airport had been the longest ride of my life. Every bump in the road had sent fresh waves of agony through my broken ribs, every breath had been a reminder of what loving SERAPHINA CHEN had cost me. But as the plane had lifted off, carrying me away from everything I'd ever known, I'd felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. The nightmare was finally over. I was free. Behind me, 12 hours later, SERAPHINA had opened my message. The package of evidence had hit her like a sledgehammer, shattering the carefully constructed lies she'd been living in. She'd called my number frantically, only to hear the cold voice of an automated message telling her the number was no longer in service. She'd rushed to my house, pounding on the door until my mother had answered with red, swollen eyes. "He's gone, dear," Mom had said gently. "He left for England this morning. He said he never wanted to see any of us again." By then, I was already 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, watching the sun rise on a future that finally belonged to me alone. 3 years of silence, of building a new life from the ashes of the old one, of learning to trust again. 3 years of Aurora's patient love, slowly healing wounds I'd thought would never close. I'd graduated summa cum laude from Cambridge, landed a prestigious position at a cutting-edge research firm, and for the first time since leaving home, I'd felt genuinely happy. That happiness shattered the moment I saw her standing outside the campus library. SERAPHINA looked older, thinner, her once lustrous hair now dull and lifeless. The designer clothes she'd always favored had been replaced by a simple black coat that hung loosely on her diminished frame. But it was her eyes that shocked me most. Those amber eyes that had once sparkled with mischief and warmth now held nothing but desperate, hollow pain. "Ethan," she breathed, stepping forward as if to embrace me. I stepped back instinctively, my body recognizing a threat before my mind could process it. 3 years of healing, and she could still make me feel like that broken 18-year-old bleeding in an alley. "What are you doing here?" My voice came out flat, emotionless, a defense mechanism I'd perfected during countless therapy sessions. "I've been looking for you," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "For 2 years I've been trying to find you. I know the truth now, Ethan, about everything, about Kieran, about what that monster who claimed to be my future self did to you." "Stop!" The word cut through her, rambling like a blade. "I don't want to hear it." "But you have to listen." She reached into her purse and pulled out a worn leather journal. "I found this hidden in my room after everything fell apart. It's her diary, the older me, the things she wrote, the things she did." I said stop. I started walking away, but she followed, her heels clicking frantically on the cob. "Less stones." "She destroyed you for a lie." SERAPHINA's voice cracked with emotion. "Kieran was never my destiny. He was a fraud, a manipulator who—" "Ethan?" A familiar voice cut through her desperate pleading. I turned to see Aurora approaching, her arms full of research papers, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as she took in the scene. Aurora Winters was everything SERAPHINA had never been: steady, rational, genuinely caring. Where SERAPHINA had been fire and chaos, Aurora was warmth and light. She'd found me during my darkest period at Cambridge, when nightmares still plagued my sleep and I flinched at unexpected touches. She'd never pushed, never demanded explanations, just quietly stood by me until I was ready to trust again. "Is everything all right?" Aurora asked, moving to stand beside me with the natural protectiveness that had drawn me to her in the first place. "This is SERAPHINA," I said simply. "An old acquaintance." The word acquaintance hit SERAPHINA like a physical blow. I watched her face crumple, watched the last vestiges of hope die in her eyes. "Acquaintance?" she whispered. "Ethan, we were everything to each other. We were supposed to get married, have children." "That was a long time ago," I interrupted. "I'm with Aurora now." Aurora slipped her hand into mine, a gesture so natural and protective that it spoke volumes about the life I'd built without SERAPHINA. "Perhaps we should go," she suggested gently, sensing the tension. But SERAPHINA wasn't finished. "Please," she begged, falling to her knees right there on the busy street, tears streaming down her face. "Just read the diary, just see what really happened, what she did to both of us. Against my better judgment, I took the journal from her trembling hands. Aurora squeezed my other hand supportively as I opened it to a random page. March 15th. I convinced Seraphina to divorce Ethan today. He's been diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic stage 3. The doctors say it's likely stress-induced, probably from years of our marriage falling apart as I pulled her toward KIERAN. He begged her to stay, said he needed her more than ever. But I showed her photos of the life she could have with KIERAN, and she chose to leave him. Ethan signed the papers with tears in his eyes, asking why the 18-year-old girl who swore to love him forever had stopped caring. So pathetic. People change, love dies. He should have accepted that years ago. My blood ran cold as I continued reading. April 2nd. Ethan died today. The cancer ate him alive over 6 months, and Seraphina never visited once. She was too busy planning her wedding to KIERAN. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, but instead, I feel empty. Like I killed something beautiful for no reason. June 10th. The wedding was perfect. Seraphina looked radiant in her designer gown. KIERAN couldn't stop smiling. Finally, everything was as it should be. December 3rd. Found out the truth about KIERAN today. The investment firm he claimed to work for doesn't exist. The family money he said he inherited, stolen from his previous girlfriends. The overseas accounts he's been managing for Seraphina, empty. He's been embezzling from her family's company for 3 years, using her trust to fund his real life, an apartment in Monaco where he keeps his actual fiancée, a Russian model named Natasha. December 4th, showed Seraphina the evidence. She collapsed. Actually collapsed, right there in our $1 million apartment that KIERAN bought with her money. She kept screaming, "What have I done? What have I done?" She tried to call Ethan, forgetting he was dead. I had to remind her that we killed him for this lie. December 5th, Seraphina attempted suicide last night. Jet. I had to have her committed. She keeps saying she murdered the only man who ever truly loved her for a fantasy. She's not wrong. I flipped ahead, my hands shaking. January 20th, the courts ruled against us. KIERAN's theft was so extensive that Seraphina's family lost everything. The company, the house, their reputation, all gone. He disappeared back to Russia with millions of dollars and a clear conscience. Seraphina blames me for destroying her life, but I know the truth. I destroyed Ethan's life. Hers was just collateral damage. February 14th, Valentine's Day. In another timeline, Ethan would be alive. He and 18-year-old Seraphina would be celebrating their anniversary, maybe planning children, building something real and lasting. Instead, he's dead, she's in a psychiatric facility, and I'm alone with the knowledge that I orchestrated it all. I thought I was saving her from wasting 10 years on the wrong man. Instead, I cost her the right man entirely. February 15th, I've decided what I have to do. I'm going back to when I was 18. I'm going to fix this. I'll make sure she never meets KIERAN, never doubts her love for Ethan. Maybe if I can prevent this timeline, Ethan will live. Maybe they'll both get the happiness I stole from them. The final entry was barely legible, written in what looked like blood. March 1st, the time machine is ready. KIERAN is locked in my basement, and I've given him the same 99 strikes I gave Ethan all those years ago. It won't bring Ethan back, but it's justice of a sort. If this works, if I can change the past, maybe the Ethan in that timeline will forgive me. Maybe he'll get to live the life I destroyed. I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so fucking sorry. I closed the diary, my hands trembling. The street seemed to spin around me as the full scope of what I'd just read sank in. In some twisted alternate timeline, I'd married Seraphina only to die of cancer, abandoned and alone, while she left me for a con artist who'd stolen everything she had. That's why she came back, Seraphina whispered, watching my face. The older me, she was trying to fix what she'd broken, but she was so consumed with guilt and rage that she just made everything worse. She thought if she could get me to KIERAN faster, somehow that would prevent the cancer, prevent the abandonment, prevent the theft, but all she did was hurt you worse. I looked at her kneeling there on the cold street, tears streaming down her face, and felt nothing. No anger, no love, no hate. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where she used to live in my heart. Where is she now? I asked. Your future self? Gone. Disappeared the day I confronted KIERAN with the truth, but not before she made sure he paid for what he'd done. Seraphina's voice turned cold. The same basement where she kept you, the same iron rods, the same 99 strikes. When the police found him, he was barely alive and completely insane. He's in a psychiatric facility now, convinced that he's being attacked by invisible demons. And you? I was arrested as an accessory after he gave my name during his breakdown, spent 18 months in prison. My family disowned me, my friends abandoned me, and I lost everything trying to make right what couldn't be fixed. She looked up at me with hollow eyes. I deserved it all. Aurora squeezed my hand tighter, anchoring me to the present, to the life I'd built without Seraphina's chaos and pain. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said finally, and I meant it. But it doesn't change anything between us. Ethan, please. No. I pulled Aurora closer, drawing strength from her steady presence. You made your choices, Seraphina, all of you, past, present, and future. You chose Kieran over me, chose lies over truth, chose fantasy over reality. The consequences of those choices aren't my responsibility. But I love you, she cried, the words echoing off the ancient buildings around us. I've always loved you. Everything I did was because that monster convinced me it was for your own good. If you'd loved me, I interrupted, my voice gaining strength, you never would have chosen someone else. If you'd loved me, you would have trusted what we had instead of believing fairy tales about destiny. If you'd loved me, you would have cared when I called you broken and bleeding instead of running to comfort the man who'd orchestrated my destruction. She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. I spent 3 years in therapy learning to forgive myself for loving someone who was never capable of loving me back. I built a new life, found someone who actually values me, achieved things I never dreamed possible. I'm happy, Seraphina. For the first time since I met you, I'm genuinely happy. Aurora smiled up at me, her eyes bright with pride and love. He's brilliant, she said to Seraphina, though her words were clearly meant for me. Just last month, his research was featured in Nature. Harvard wants to recruit him. MIT is offering him a full professorship. The contrast was stark and undeniable. While I'd been building a career, finding love, and creating a future worth living, Seraphina had been destroying everything she touched in service to a lie. While I'd learned to trust again, she'd learned only how to regret. I'm glad you found the truth, I said, stepping back. I hope it brings you peace. But my life is here now, with Aurora. Whatever we had, whatever we might have had, died in that alley 3 years ago. Ethan, wait. But I was already walking away, Aurora's hand warm and sure in mine. Behind us I could hear Seraphina sobbing, calling my name, begging for just one more chance. I didn't look back. Are you all right? Aurora asked as we reached the safety of the library steps. I turned to kiss her forehead, marveling at how perfectly she fit against me, how right this felt. I'm perfect, I said, and for the first time in years, I truly meant it. In the distance, Seraphina was still kneeling on the cobblestones, clutching the diary that contained the ashes of every life she'd destroyed. Students walked around her like she was part of the scenery, invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. Just like she'd made me feel all those years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it brought no satisfaction. Only the quiet contentment of a man who'd finally, truly moved on. 2 years after that devastating encounter on the Cambridge streets, I stood in Aurora's childhood garden, surrounded by her family's warmth and acceptance, holding the woman I truly loved in my arms. The engagement ring, a simple but elegant sapphire that matched her eyes, caught the golden afternoon light as she laughed at something her father had whispered in her ear. Speech, speech, her younger brother called out, raising his champagne glass with the enthusiasm only a 19-year-old could muster. Aurora's mother, a gracious woman who'd welcomed me into their family from the very first dinner, smiled encouragingly. Oh yes, Ethan, tell us how you knew our Aurora was the one. I looked around at the faces gathered in celebration, university colleagues who'd become genuine friends, Aurora's extended family who treated me like a beloved son, neighbors who'd watched our relationship bloom over the past 3 years. This was what love was supposed to look like. Joyful, supportive, built on trust and mutual respect, rather than manipulation and desperate obsession. I knew Aurora was the one, I said, pulling her closer, because she saw me at my most broken and chose to stay anyway. Not because she wanted to fix me or change me, but because she believed I was worth the wait while I fixed myself. Aurora's eyes filled with tears of happiness as scattered applause rippled through the garden. Her father, a distinguished professor of literature who'd initially been skeptical of his daughter dating a younger man, now beamed with genuine affection. "Welcome to the family, son," he said, clasping my shoulder with the warmth I'd never received from my own father. "We couldn't be happier." The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being treated like an inconvenience by Seraphina's family, tolerated but never truly welcomed, I'd found myself embraced by people who valued my character over my pedigree, my intentions over my history. "When's the wedding?" Aurora's cousin asked, and suddenly everyone was talking at once about venues and dates and honeymoon destinations. "Next spring," Aurora announced, her smile radiant. "We want to get married here in England, then spend our honeymoon traveling through Europe before we return to the States." Return to the States? The word sent a thrill through me. After 5 years abroad, I was finally ready to go home, not as the broken teenager who'd fled in shame, but as Dr. Ethan Rivers, internationally recognized researcher, devoted fiancé, and genuinely happy man. My phone buzzed with a text from my new publisher. "Your book just hit the New York Times bestseller list. Congratulations." The book, an academic work on neural network applications that had somehow captured mainstream attention, was just the latest in a string of professional successes that still felt surreal. Harvard had made their offer official last week. Full professor with tenure track, my own research lab, and a salary that would have seemed impossible to my 18-year-old self. "Good news?" Aurora asked, noticing my smile. "The book made the bestseller list," I said, showing her the text. The garden erupted in fresh congratulations. These people were genuinely happy for my success, not threatened by it or trying to diminish it. Aurora kissed me with fierce pride, her joy in my achievements as authentic as my own. 300 miles away, in a cramped London apartment, above a fish and chips shop, SERAPHINA CHEN sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at the newspaper article she'd found online. Cambridge researchers break through Worktop's bestseller charts. The photograph showed me at a book signing, Aurora beside me wearing a smile that outshone any spotlight. We looked perfectly matched, intellectually, professionally. The article mentioned our engagement, our upcoming move to Harvard, our shared passion for research that was revolutionizing the field. Seraphina's fingers traced the screen of her laptop, remembering when she used to be the one standing beside me at academic events, when her face was the one that lit up with pride at my achievements. But that girl was gone, destroyed by choices that had seemed so important at the time. Her current life was a gray shadow of what it had once been. After her release from prison, she'd struggled to find work. Her family name, once respected in business circles, was now synonymous with scandal and theft. The few jobs she could get were menial, data entry, filing, the kind of work that paid just enough to keep her fed and housed, but offered no hope of advancement or fulfillment. She'd never married. How could she? Every man she met paled in comparison to the memory of what she'd lost. A few had tried to get close, drawn by her faded beauty or mysterious sadness, but she'd pushed them all away. None of them looked at her the way Ethan used to, like she was the center of the universe, like her happiness was more important than breathing. The phone calls with her mother had dwindled to stilted monthly check-ins, more duty than love. Her former friends had long since stopped trying to maintain contact. Even KIERAN, broken and institutionalized, was beyond her reach now, though she'd heard through prison contacts that he spent his days muttering about the boy with amber eyes who wouldn't die, never quite grasping that his own lies had destroyed everything. But it was the small details in articles like this that cut deepest. Aurora's family had thrown them an engagement party. Ethan was returning to America as a conquering hero rather than a refugee. He spoke of their shared future and mutual dreams with the easy confidence of a man who'd never had his heart shattered by the person he trusted most. He had everything she'd once dreamed of giving him, and more than she'd ever been capable of providing. The worst part was knowing she deserved none of it. Not his forgiveness, not his friendship, certainly not his love. She'd made her choices with eyes wide open, choosing fantasy over reality, manipulation over trust, destiny over devotion. The consequences of those choices had played out exactly as they should have. Her phone rang, interrupting her spiral into self-pity. The caller ID showed her supervisor's number. "Chen, we need you to come in early tomorrow. Johnson called in sick and we're behind on the quarterly reports." "Of course," she said automatically. "I'll be there." Another 12-hour day of mindless data entry awaited, followed by a frozen dinner eaten alone while watching television shows that reminded her of the life she'd thrown away. It was a fitting punishment for someone who'd had everything and chosen to destroy it. Meanwhile, as London settled into another dreary evening, I was walking through Aurora's family garden with her grandfather, a retired diplomat who'd taken an immediate liking to me. "You know," he said, his accent crisp with decades of refined education, "Aurora was always our most discerning granddaughter. Never fell for flash or charm, she wanted substance, character. When she brought you home that first Christmas, I knew she'd found what she was looking for." I thought about Seraphina's desperate tears on the Cambridge street, her pleas for one more chance, her insistence that she'd always loved me. The contrast was striking. Aurora had never needed to convince anyone of her feelings, they were evident in every glance, every touch, every quiet moment of support. "I'm the lucky one," I said. "She saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't have recognized." "That's what real love does," the old man smiled. "It doesn't try to change you, it helps you become the best version of yourself." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Aurora and I found ourselves alone on the garden swing where we'd had our first real conversation 3 years ago. She was wearing the sundress I'd bought her in Paris, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking every inch the happy bride-to-be. "Any regrets?" she asked, settling against my shoulder with the easy intimacy of long familiarity. I considered the question seriously. If Seraphina had never broken my heart, I might never have left America. Never would have found myself at Cambridge, lost and healing. Never would have met Aurora in that quiet corner of the library where she was researching Victorian poetry while I struggled through my first graduate course. "None," I said, meaning it completely. "Everything had to happen exactly as it did to bring me here." "Even the bad parts?" "Especially the bad parts." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the lavender scent of her shampoo. "They taught me to recognize the real thing when I found it." She tilted her face up to mine, and in her eyes I saw everything I'd once thought I had with Seraphina, but never really did. Trust, partnership, genuine love that asked for nothing but gave everything. "I love you, Dr. Rivers," she whispered. "I love you too, future Mrs. Rivers," I whispered back. Somewhere in the distance, London's lights twinkled like fallen stars, and I knew that somewhere among them, Seraphina was living with the consequences of the choices that had brought me to this moment. Not with cruelty or satisfaction, but with the quiet justice of a universe that ultimately rewarded genuine love over manufactured destiny. The past was finally, truly past. The future, our future, stretched out before us bright with possibility. And I had never been happier to be exactly where I was.